This is John Hayden doing vlog chapter 3 of Alan Reid's Smartphone Paradox, and I find this whole entire subject very entertaining, and I'm very excited to read about it, about other people's point of views and perspective of this topic. And the summary that I gathered from Habit Making Devices, which is chapter 3, is that this chapter discusses the possibilities of a certified addiction that our smartphones may have upon us. And I think it's good that someone starts to acknowledge the addiction or the impact that the iPhone has on us mentally and possibly physically. Not a lot of people discuss it, which is, I think, it is a very informative chapter and something that I thoroughly enjoyed reading, because it's a topic. It's a subject of this topic that I've always wondered, like, are we addicted to our phones, or is it just a part of our everyday lives? And that's because Alan Reid says in this chapter at the beginning, he says we are sensitive to these things because they are initially or intimately informative to who we are. And by saying intimately informative to who we are, it could say that, it could have a bad impact on us. It have a good or a bad impact on us. But as soon as we hear a bad impact about it, we don't want to talk about it anymore. And Alan Reid quotes Judson Brewer, and he says that he defines addiction as continued use despite adverse consequences, which I think is a great definition of addiction, because you don't really need, the hardcore drugs to be addicted, or an alcohol, or anything like that. It could be something as simple as a smartphone. You could just be addicted to that because you feel like you're without it a couple minutes of the day. You don't freak out, but you're starting to think about it, and it's in the back of your mind. You can't get it out of the back of your mind. And another reason or another thing that Alan Reid says is that the ways in which we measure personal consequence will inform our addictiveness. It depends on how bad our addiction is by the consequences we have of it. He says that in this chapter. He says that sometimes people are so addicted that they're texting and driving, and that consequence could be in a car crash. Or it could that's one of the major consequences that can come out of this. And he says that now a small consequence compared to that could be just losing your friend, or losing your friend over social media, something small like that, because you use your phone too much. And that's just another consequence of your addiction or your attachment to your phone. And he also describes substance addictions and behavioral addictions. And obviously this is a behavioral addiction because the phone is not a substance, obviously. But the behavioral addiction can result in gambling and gaming addictions through the smartphone. So yes, we're attached to the smartphone itself, but we could also attach ourselves to other things through the smartphone, which in my case, it's, killing two birds with one stone. You're getting two addictions: smartphone and gambling, or smartphone and gaming, or stuff like that. And as I was reading this chapter, I've had a couple questions myself. It's kind of going through my mind. It's like, how can we be addicted to the smartphone when everyone is using it? Or how can we be considered addicted when everybody's using the smartphone? Usually when someone's addicted to something, they're the only one doing it. Or they're, the small percentage of people doing that addictive activity. But how can we consider ourselves be addicted to the smartphone when everybody in this time and age in the society has a smartphone? It's almost like if you don't have a smartphone, you kind of look weird. But it's just, how can we tell ourselves we're addicted? Do we compare ourselves to other people about how they use their smartphones or stuff like that? That's just something, and that's something that I was wondering, like, how do we stand out with our addiction to the smartphone when everybody has somewhat of the same addiction to that smartphone? And the other question is that, are we really addicted to our smartphone? Like, do we get our entertainment or enjoyment from the smartphone, or are we just depending on our smartphone for everyday lives? Like communication, that's pretty important, and information, like knowing where your class is or knowing where you need to go, like if you need to drive, putting a GPS. I mean, are we addicted or are we dependent on the smartphone? Which both of those don't sound great at the end of the day, but depending sounds a little bit better than addicted to our smartphone. And that's leads to another question of mine: is who has the most control, us or the smartphone? I mean, is the smartphone telling us to get this kind of addiction, or are we bestowing this addiction ourselves to the smartphone? Because when we buy the smartphone, we don't have to use it as much as we do. And is the smartphone, are there little tweaks and little gimmicks in the smartphone that makes us addicted to the smartphone itself? Or is it just us, making ourselves addicted to the smartphone because we need to be dependent on it or stuff like that? But that's all in all, that's what I summarized from chapter 3, and those were the 3 questions that were going in the back of my mind that I was wondering while I was reading this chapter, and I enjoyed it.